Greetings to our audience. Thank you for always supporting the channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing. There are moments in life when a word of gratitude takes decades before it can finally be spoken. This is a deeply emotional story about people who once served America, about Vietnamese refugees drifting across the South China Sea, and about a reunion that moved millions to tears. Old photographs always have a way of awakening memories. When a couple in Vancouver, Washington looked back at pictures from long ago, a part of the past they thought had been buried came rushing back. They remembered war, loss, and the desperate escape from Vietnam after the fall of Saigon. After the United States withdrew from the Vietnam War, many South Vietnamese families faced unimaginable hardship. For those trying to flee, the future became a gamble between life and death. In 1981, one family decided to risk everything for freedom. The father faced the most painful decision of his life: stay behind and accept a hopeless future for his children, or board a fragile boat and search for survival across the open sea. They chose to leave. Under the cover of darkness, an old boat carrying more than 40 people quietly slipped away from shore. Everyone understood that getting lost at sea might still be better than staying behind, but disaster soon struck. The engine failed. Food ran out. Drinking water was gone. For days, they drifted helplessly in the South China Sea. Foreign ships passed by, but none stopped. Despair grew stronger with every passing hour, and prayers echoed across the vast ocean. Then a miracle appeared. From the horizon came the U.S. Navy destroyer USS Ingersoll, carrying the red, white, and blue American flag. The ship was initially traveling in the opposite direction, but one sailor noticed something unusual in the water, what looked like a small box or waving arms in the sea. It was the tiny refugee boat. The captain immediately ordered the ship to turn around and approach. When the people on the small boat saw American sailors standing on deck, they knew they had been saved. The refugees were exhausted, starving, and out of water. They had only one dream: escape the darkness and build a new life in a better land. To them, America was heaven on earth. Years passed, and the family built a new life in America. They witnessed weddings, graduations, and the birth of children, yet one burden always remained in their hearts. They had to find the sailors who saved them and finally say thank you. After many years of searching, a letter unexpectedly reached the right place. They found the sailor who had first spotted their boat in the middle of the ocean all those years ago. Even more astonishing, he lived in Vancouver, Washington, not far from them at all. The family said they would have traveled anywhere in the world to meet the man who saved their lives, but they could hardly believe he lived in the same region. The reunion finally took place in a Vietnamese restaurant, the perfect setting to complete a missing piece of their lives after more than 40 years. Ayla, the younger sister, who had also been on the refugee boat, helped track down the former sailor. The photographs taken that day became more than images of a grateful family meeting their rescuer. They became one of the most beautiful portraits of America itself, a place where compassion, sacrifice, and opportunity still exist. The elderly sailor said he felt deeply happy to finally meet the people he once rescued at sea. The Vietnamese family said America had given them the chance to become the best versions of themselves. They were proud to call themselves Americans. A dream that began on a tiny boat in the South China Sea ended decades later with tearful embraces filled with gratitude and humanity. Today we look back on a remarkable 51-year journey, from the spring of 1975 to the year 2026, the story of hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese people leaving their homeland during war and chaos aboard the final evacuation aircraft and fragile refugee boats crossing the South China Sea in search of freedom. Many were just little boys and girls at the time, clinging tightly to their parents amid the sounds of helicopters, crashing waves, and tearful farewells. Some babies were pulled from the sea at night by U.S. Navy sailors. Entire families were rescued by American warships operating in the South China Sea. More than half a century later, those refugee children grew up wearing U.S. military uniforms, becoming officers, colonels, generals, military doctors, defense engineers, and senior leaders in the American Armed Forces. They devoted their lives to serving and defending the United States as a way of repaying the country that sheltered their families during their darkest hour. April 1975 was one of the most painful moments in modern Vietnamese history. When Saigon fell, tens of thousands of Vietnamese people searched desperately for ways to escape their homeland. Helicopters landed one after another on American aircraft carriers offshore. U.S. Navy warships opened their decks to rescue refugees. Many Vietnamese were taken aboard ships such as the USS Midway, USS Blue Ridge, and USS Hancock during the final evacuation operations of the Vietnam War. But the tragedy did not end there. After 1975, the boat people crisis continued for many years. Small wooden boats overloaded with refugees crossed the sea amid hunger, pirates, storms, and death. Tens of thousands never reached freedom. Yet hundreds of thousands survived, thanks to international merchant ships and especially the U.S. Navy, which rescued refugees from the South China Sea. Among those surviving children were people who later wrote remarkable stories of gratitude toward America. One of the most notable names is Hung Cao. Born in Vietnam, he left the country in 1975 as a young boy when his family fled as refugees after the war. From a child who could not speak English and lived the difficult life of an immigrant, Hung Cao rose through determination and hard work to graduate from the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis and become a U.S. Navy Special Operations Officer. He served more than 25 years in the U.S. military, participating in operations in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other dangerous regions. He commanded Special Operations Forces and received numerous prestigious military decorations. For many Vietnamese Americans, Hung Cao symbolizes gratitude toward America, expressed not merely in words, but through a lifetime of military service. The image of a former refugee child standing among senior U.S. Navy leadership has become a source of pride for Vietnamese communities worldwide. Another highly respected figure is Luong Xuan Viet. He and his family left Vietnam in 1975 and settled in America while he was still a child. From the life of a refugee, he joined the U.S. Army and rose through the ranks through extraordinary ability and determination. Luong Xuan Viet became the first Vietnamese American general officer in U.S. Army history to achieve the rank of Major General. He commanded American troops in Afghanistan and led major combat units. To many American veterans, his story represents the American dream, proof that a refugee child can one day rise to command the world's most powerful military. Another remarkable figure is Elizabeth Pham, the first Vietnamese American female naval aviator and also a military physician. Her family endured a difficult refugee journey after the war. Through extraordinary perseverance, Elizabeth Pham became a role model for a new generation of Vietnamese Americans, intelligent, resilient, and committed to serving the United States military. In both medicine and military aviation, the image of a Vietnamese American woman piloting USAF military aircraft would have been unimaginable to many refugees crossing the sea decades earlier. Beyond these famous names, many Vietnamese American officers, colonels, defense engineers, and military specialists continue serving in the U.S. Armed Forces today. Some serve aboard advanced naval warships. Others work in the Pentagon, in cybersecurity, military intelligence, strategic air operations, and defense technology research. Many are descendants of refugees once rescued in the South China Sea. They grew up hearing stories from their parents about drifting helplessly at sea and the miraculous sight of American warships appearing on the horizon. What makes this 51-year journey so extraordinary is not only the success of Vietnamese refugees abroad, but also the powerful sense of gratitude many Vietnamese Americans feel toward the United States. For many refugee families, America was not only the place that gave them a future, it was the country that saved their children and grandchildren. That is why many young Vietnamese Americans chose military service. They consider wearing the American uniform a great honor. Many say their parents were rescued by American sailors decades ago, and today they volunteer to serve in the U.S. military to help defend freedom for future generations. Looking back after 51 years, the journey of Vietnamese refugees from 1975 to 2026 is a chapter of history filled with tears, resilience, and hope. From refugee camps in Guam, the Philippines, and Arkansas, Children who once arrived with nothing became doctors, engineers, professors, entrepreneurs, and even senior military leaders in the United States. Some were once carried off rescue ships as infants and later stood on the decks of U.S. warships wearing Navy officer uniforms. Others who crossed the sea as babies grew up to become military pilots defending American skies. Few refugee communities in modern history have written such a remarkable story. And perhaps the most emotional image of all is the American flag flying beside Vietnamese refugee communities during annual remembrance ceremonies. For many Vietnamese living abroad, America was not only the country that opened its doors, it was the nation that saved their families during the darkest moment of their lives. More than half a century has passed. The refugee children are now grandparents with gray hair, yet the memories of American warships in the South China Sea and the hands of U.S. sailors pulling them from the ocean have never faded. The 51-year history of the Vietnamese refugee community in the United States is not only a story of war or migration. It is a story of gratitude, perseverance, and contribution. From fragile refugee boats in the South China Sea to the honor guards of the U.S. military today, this journey has become a memorable chapter in Vietnamese history around the world. And whenever people see Vietnamese Americans wearing the uniform of the United States military, many remember one simple but powerful truth. America once saved their lives, and today they dedicate their own lives to defending America.